In the spring of 1945, a German Panther tank commander named Wilhelm Bartelborth sat in his turret near Cologne Cathedral, waiting for the American tanks he knew were coming. He had fought Shermans before. He knew exactly what they looked like. He knew his 75mm high-velocity gun could destroy them at ranges where they could not return fire. When a tank appeared at the intersection ahead of him, he ordered his gunner to hold fire. The silhouette was wrong. It was too low, too sleek, nothing like the boxy Shermans he had been killing for months. Bartelborth believed he was looking at a German vehicle. Seconds later, 3 armor-piercing rounds slammed into his Panther, and everything he thought he knew about American firepower became irrelevant. The weapon that killed Bartelborth's tank was the American 90mm gun, a weapon German intelligence had never warned him about. It was mounted on a new tank called the Pershing, and it could do something no American tank gun had done before. It could kill a Panther from the front. This is the story of how that gun came to be, why it arrived so late, and what happened when German tank crews finally encountered a weapon they never expected to face. The 90mm gun began its life pointed at the sky, not at tanks. On June 9, 1938, the United States Army issued a development contract for a new heavy anti-aircraft gun to replace the aging 3-inch M1918. The result was the 90mm M1, which entered production in 1940. An improved version, the M1A1, was accepted as standard on May 22, 1941, and became the primary American heavy anti-aircraft gun for the rest of the war. Manufactured by companies including Alice Chalmers, it could fire up to 20 rounds per minute in the anti-aircraft role and was considered the American answer to the legendary German 88mm flak gun. The idea to point this weapon at tanks instead of aircraft emerged within the Ordnance Department in September 1942. This was months before any Allied unit had even encountered a Tiger tank in combat. Engineers tested an experimental 90mm T7 gun in the turret of an M10 tank destroyer in October 1942. The gun proved too heavy for the M10's turret, requiring an entirely new design. By September 1943, the redesigned turret with power traverse and counterweight was ready, leading to the T-71 gun motor carriage prototype. This vehicle would eventually become the M36 Jackson tank destroyer. Simultaneously, the Ordnance Department developed the T-25 and T-26 medium tank prototypes to carry the 90mm in a fully enclosed turret. The tank-mounted version was designated the 90mm M3 gun. The man who championed this weapon more than anyone else was Major General Gladeon Barnes, Chief of Research and Engineering in the Ordnance Department. Barnes pushed relentlessly against institutional resistance, fighting battle after battle in Pentagon conference rooms while American tankers fought with inadequate weapons in the field. He would ultimately lead the mission that brought the first Pershings into combat in February 1945. But Barnes faced an opponent far more powerful than the Germans. His name was Lieutenant General Leslie J. McNair, and he commanded Army ground forces from March 1942 until his death in July 1944. McNair held convictions about armored warfare that would shape American tank doctrine for years and delay the 90mm program by critical months that cost American lives. McNair believed tanks existed for infantry support and exploitation of breakthroughs, not for fighting other tanks. Enemy armor was to be destroyed by specialized tank destroyer forces. These were fast, lightly armored vehicles carrying powerful anti-tank guns, held in reserve and committed en masse at decisive points to blunt enemy armored thrusts. The doctrine sounded elegant in theory. In a letter to Lieutenant General Jacob Devers in the fall of 1943, McNair wrote that there could be no basis for the T-26 tank other than the conception of a tank versus tank duel, which he believed was unsound and unnecessary. Both British and American battle experience, he argued, had demonstrated that the anti-tank gun disposed properly was the master of the tank. He saw no indication whatsoever that the 76mm gun was inadequate against the German Tiger. McNair also imposed what he called a battle need criterion. No weapon could be rushed into production until combat proved it necessary. This was meant to prevent wasting resources on the 3,000-mile supply line across the Atlantic. The logic seemed sound from a logistical perspective. He pushed for the T-25 and T-26 to be armed with 75 or 76mm guns instead of the 90mm, arguing there was no call from any theatre for a bigger weapon. Reports from North Africa and Italy had not indicated a desperate need for heavier tank armament. What McNair failed to anticipate was that the Germans were about to deploy the Panther in massive numbers, and that American tankers would face an enemy they could not kill. Standing against McNair were three key figures who understood what was coming. Lieutenant General Jacob Devers, former Armoured Force commander and later commander of the European theatre, was the strongest advocate for the T-26. He had seen the reports from tank crews who had faced Panthers and Tigers. He believed the tank destroyer concept was impractical on the battlefield, and that the weapon to beat a tank was another tank with a bigger gun. Major General Barnes persistently pushed the Ordnance Department's case for 90mm armed tanks, arguing that technical readiness should not wait for men to die, proving a need that engineers could already foresee. And General George C. Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, would ultimately make the decision that mattered. On December 16, 1943, Marshall overruled McNair and authorized production of 250 T-26 E-1 tanks. This was the critical turning point that saved the program. But even after Marshall's decision, the debate continued within the Army bureaucracy. As late as April 1944, Army ground forces were still suggesting the T-25 and T-26 be armed with 75 and 76mm guns rather than the 90mm that Ordnance had designed them to carry. McNair's death changed everything. On July 25, 1944, he was killed by short bombing during Operation Cobra near St. Lo in Normandy, becoming the highest-ranking American killed by friendly fire in the entire war. The Normandy combat reports that summer, showing Sherman's helpless against Panthers in the hedgerow country of France, finally settled the argument that McNair had refused to accept. General Dwight D. Eisenhower was reportedly furious when he learned the truth about American tank armament. Ordnance had told him the 76mm would handle anything the Germans had. Now he found his tanks could not knock out a damn thing with it. While the Americans debated tank guns in Washington, German intelligence was busy studying the weapons they already faced on the battlefield. On February 22, 1943, a reconnaissance troop of Schwerpanzerabteilung 501 captured an early M4, a one Sherman named War Daddy, two near Spatler in Tunisia during the fighting around Kasserine Pass. They shipped it to the Kummersdorf proving ground outside Berlin, where it was designated test vehicle number 259. German engineers meticulously annotated armor thickness and slope angles on the hull and turret. They fired captured American ammunition at the armor plates. They dissected the transmission and engine. They knew the Sherman intimately. At the Hillesleben Armaments Conference on June 6 and 7, 1943, presided over by Reichsminister Albert Speer, a captured Sherman was demonstrated alongside Panther and Ferdinand prototypes in hill climbing and mobility comparisons. German officers watched the American tank struggle up grades that the new German designs handled easily. They came away confident that they understood their enemy. German technical assessments were broadly accurate, but fostered dangerous complacency. The official weapons testing office calculated that the Tiger's 88mm gun could penetrate the Sherman's differential case from 2,100 meters and the turret front from 1,800 meters. German wartime publications called the Sherman a praiseworthy product of the North American laboratories. They respected its reliability and mobility, qualities their own tanks often lacked. Tiger units in Italy reportedly loved captured Shermans converted into recovery vehicles because they ran when German equipment broke down. But they recognized the Sherman's 75mm gun posed no threat whatsoever to Panther or Tiger frontal armor. A Sherman could pump rounds into a Panther's glacis all day and accomplish nothing but announcing its position. This was the critical intelligence failure. German tank crews were trained to present their thicker frontal armor toward the enemy, confident that American guns could not penetrate it. The Panther's 80mm glacis plate, sloped at 55 degrees, provided roughly 140mm of effective thickness against incoming rounds. The Sherman's 75mm M3 gun could penetrate only about 61mm of armor at 1,000 yards. Even the up-gunned 76mm Sherman could not reliably penetrate the Panther's glacis at combat ranges. German tactical manuals reinforced this assumption. Keep your front to the enemy, and the Americans cannot hurt you. For the weapons Americans actually fielded through most of 1944, this assumption was essentially correct. What the Germans did not know, and what their intelligence services completely failed to discover, was that the Americans were developing the T-20 series heavy tanks and the M36 tank destroyer with the 90mm gun. There was no advance intelligence on either system in German records. No captured documents, no aerial reconnaissance of the factories, no agent reports. When these vehicles appeared in late 1944 and early 1945, German forces encountered weapons they had no tactical framework to counter. The assumptions that had kept Panther crews alive suddenly became the assumptions that got them killed. The 90mm M3 gun represented a transformational leap over previous American tank armament. With standard M82 armor-piercing capped ammunition at a muzzle velocity of 2,670 feet per second, it could penetrate approximately 112mm of rolled homogeneous armor at 1,000 yards at 30 degrees obliquity. The 75mm M3 gun could penetrate only about 61mm at the same range. The 90mm delivered roughly 80% more muzzle energy than the 76mm M1 gun that had been the previous best American tank weapon. The full ammunition family gave American crews versatility no previous gun had offered. The M77 armor-piercing, solid shot traveled at 2,700 feet per second and performed better against heavily sloped armor than capped rounds because it did not have a soft cap that could deflect on impact. The M82 armor-piercing capped round with high explosive filler was the standard tank-killing ammunition, designed to penetrate and then detonate inside the enemy vehicle. The T-33 armor-piercing round, manufactured with improved heat treatment for a harder penetrating cap, could defeat the Panther's glacis at over 1,000 yards. The M304 high-velocity armor-piercing round with its tungsten carbide core traveled at 3,350 feet per second, and could penetrate the Panther's glacis at 450 yards, and even the King Tiger's massive frontal plate at 100 yards. The gun's effectiveness against specific German tanks reveals why it fundamentally changed the tactical equation on the Western Front. With T-33 ammunition, the 90mm could penetrate the Panther's infamous sloped glacis at over 1,000 yards. The 76mm Sherman gun could not defeat that armor at any combat range with standard rounds. Against the Tiger's 100mm vertical frontal plate, the standard M82 round was effective at roughly 1,000 yards. Only the Tiger II's massive 150mm glacis, sloped at 50 degrees, remained effectively invulnerable to standard 90mm ammunition, though the scarce tungsten-cored M304 round could theoretically penetrate it at very close range. Compared to its German counterparts, the 90mm M3 was roughly equivalent to the Tiger's 88mm KWK-36 gun in penetration performance with standard ammunition. It was competitive with the Panther's highly regarded 75mm L70 long-barreled gun. Only the Tiger II's 88mm KWK-43L71 gun clearly surpassed it in raw penetration, though American tungsten ammunition could approximately match its performance when available. The 90mm also fired a substantially larger high-explosive shell than the 76mm, making it a superior dual-purpose weapon for the combined arms fighting that characterized 1944 and 45. A factor that further aided the 90mm's effectiveness was the declining quality of German armor production. By 1944, Germany's molybdenum supply had collapsed due to Allied bombing and the loss of mineral sources. Molybdenum content in armor plate dropped from the optimal 0.3 to 0.55% to near zero in some 1945 production. American proving ground tests on captured vehicles found Panther armor with 0.22% sulfur content, far above the 0.05% maximum acceptable threshold for quality armor steel. This made plates so brittle that non-penetrating hits could cause lethal spalling inside the vehicle, showering crews with metal fragments even when rounds failed to punch through. Some late-war Panther hulls were so poorly manufactured that 75mm high-explosive shells literally blew sections of armor plate off the tank. The 90mm arrived just as German armor quality reached its nadir. The M36 Jackson tank destroyer reached Europe first and had the greater cumulative impact on the war. Development began in late 1942, with the T-71 prototype completed in September 1943. After agonizingly slow approval through the Army bureaucracy, the vehicle was standardized as the 90mm gun motor carriage M36 on June 1, 1944. Fisher Tank Arsenal produced the first 300 units by converting turretless M10A1 hulls. Normandy combat reports showing the desperate need for heavier firepower drove the contract expansion to 1,400 vehicles by July 29, 1944. Total wartime production across all variants reached approximately 1,772 vehicles. The first 40 M36s shipped to Europe in September 1944. The 776th Tank Destroyer Battalion was the first unit to receive them and entered combat in October 1944. By December 20th, just as the Battle of the Bulge erupted with the massive German Ardennes offensive, only 236 meters 36s were in combat across 7 converted tank destroyer battalions. It was not nearly enough for what was coming, but it was enough to matter. Those 236 vehicles punched far above their weight during the most desperate fighting of the Western European campaign. The M36 immediately earned a reputation as the only American vehicle that could reliably destroy heavy German tanks at distance. At the defense of St. Vith during the Bulge, M36s of the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion served as the backbone of direct fire defense against advancing German armor columns. They performed so effectively that General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding 5th Panzer Army, believed he faced an entire American corps rather than the thin defensive force actually present. St. Vith held until the night of December 21st, a devastating setback to the German timetable that threw the entire Ardennes offensive behind schedule. Individual engagements demonstrated the 90mm's extraordinary reach. Lieutenant Alfred Rose of the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion scored a confirmed kill on a Panther at 4,600 yards. The maximum effective range of the M26F telescopic sight and one of the longest confirmed tank kills of the entire Second World War. The shot required Rose to estimate range across nearly 3 miles of terrain and calculate the proper elevation for a round that would take several seconds to reach its target. Corporal Anthony Pinto of the same battalion destroyed another Panther at 4,200 yards in a separate engagement. Near Freihaldenhoven in December 1944, an M36 from the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion knocked out a King Tiger at 1,000 yards, with a side shot through the turret, one of the few confirmed King Tiger kills by American forces. On the Roa Plain that winter, the 702nd's M36s claimed 15 confirmed kills, while the 3 Sherman battalions of the 67th Armored Regiment combined managed only 5 Panthers with their 76mm guns. The 703rd Tank Destroyer Battalion compiled one of the most impressive combat records of any American armored unit in the war. For every tank destroyer the battalion lost to enemy action, they destroyed 10 German tanks or assault guns in return, finishing the war with 90 confirmed armored vehicle kills. That 10-to-1 exchange ratio demonstrated what the 90mm could accomplish in skilled hands. The T-26E3, Pershing's path to combat, was a saga of bureaucratic obstruction, overcome only by desperate battlefield necessity. Marshall's December 1943 authorization started the clock, but actual production did not begin until November 1944. When Fisher Tank Arsenal completed the first 10 T-26E3 tanks, output ramped slowly to 30 in December, 70 in January 1945, and 132 in February. The Battle of the Bulge provided the final catalyst that cut through remaining red tape. On December 22, 1944, with German panzers driving deep into American lines, T-26E3 tanks were ordered deployed to Europe immediately, bypassing all further testing requirements. Major General Gladeon Barnes, who had fought for the 90mm program for years, personally led the Zebra technical mission to deliver the new tanks to combat units. He arrived in Paris on February 9, 1945, with the first 20 T-26 E3 Pershings, which had reached the port of Antwerp in January. General Omar Bradley split them equally between 2 divisions, 10 to the 3rd Armoured Division and 10 to the 9th Armoured Division, both under 1st Army Command. Crews completed accelerated training near Aachen by February 23rd and prepared to take their new tanks into combat. First combat came on February 25, 1945, with the 3rd Armoured Division near the Roa River. The next day brought both the Pershing's first loss and its first revenge. At Elsdorf, on February 26th, the T-26 E3, nicknamed Fireball, was ambushed by Tiger No. 201 of Schwer Panzerabteilung 301 at approximately 100 yards in a close-range urban engagement. 3 88mm shots struck Fireball in rapid succession. The first penetrated through the coaxial machine gun port, killing the gunner and loader instantly. The second hit the muzzle brake, damaging the main gun. The third sheared off the commander's cupola hatch. Despite this devastating damage, Fireball was repaired by maintenance crews and returned to service by March 7th, a testament to American recovery and repair capabilities. The next day after Fireball's ambush, Sergeant Nicholas Mashlonik in Pershing No. 40 of E Company, 33rd Armoured Regiment, took revenge for his fallen comrades. He destroyed a dug-in Tiger at 1,000 yards while his tank was moving, firing 4 rapid tungsten-cored rounds into the German heavy tank. He then picked off 3 other German armoured vehicles attempting to withdraw from Elsdorf. Mashlonik later described the engagement by saying he waited until all of them were on the road with their rear ends exposed to his gun, and then picked off each one with 1 shell each. Just like shooting ducks. Another Pershing from the same company knocked out a Tiger at 900 yards, using tungsten ammunition in a separate engagement that same day. Pershing No. 40 went on to become the highest-scoring Pershing of the war, with 4 confirmed kills. By war's end, 310 M26 Pershings had been shipped to Europe, with 200 issued to combat units, though only the first 20 saw significant combat before VE Day. The most famous 90mm engagement of the war, and one of the only tank versus tank duels ever captured on motion picture film, occurred on March 6, 1945, during the 3rd Armoured Division's assault on the German city of Cologne. That morning, 2 M4 Shermans from F Company, 32nd Armoured Regiment, advanced down a street toward the famous Cologne Cathedral with its twin Gothic spires. A concealed Panther tank from Panzer Brigade 106 Feldherrnhalle, commanded by Wilhelm Bartelborth, waited near the train station with a clear field of fire down the street. When the Shermans appeared, Bartelborth's gunner opened fire. 2 75mm rounds struck the lead Sherman's turret mantlet just inches apart, killing the gunner and driver instantly and severing the left leg of the tank commander, 2nd Lieutenant Karl Kellner. Kellner tumbled from the turret and died approximately 2 hours later in a shell crater despite attempts to save him. He was 26 years old, born in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, a Silver Star recipient who had been wounded twice already in the Normandy campaign. The second Sherman was disabled by a track hit, and its crew abandoned it. 1 street north of this carnage, Staff Sergeant Robert Early commanded Pershing Eagle 7. Signal Corps cameraman Technical Sergeant Jim Bates of the 165th Photo Signal Company climbed onto Early's turret and told him a Panther was in the Cathedral Square. Bates was a pre-war cameraman from Colorado Springs, Colorado, and he recognized he was about to witness something worth filming. The 2 men walked forward together to the German Labor Front building on the corner, where they could see the Panther's flank partially exposed. Bates set up his 16mm camera. Early studied the angles and returned to Eagle 7 to brief his crew. The crew that would fight one of history's most documented tank duels consisted of 5 men. Staff Sergeant Robert Early commanded from the turret. Corporal Clarence Smoyer served as gunner, responsible for aiming and firing the main gun. Private First Class John DeRiggi of Scranton, Pennsylvania served as loader, responsible for ramming 90mm rounds into the breech. Private First Class Homer Davis, nicknamed Smokey by his crewmates, served as radio operator and bow gunner. Technical Corporal William McVeigh, nicknamed Woody, drove the 46-ton tank. Smoyer was just 21 years old, from Lehighton, Pennsylvania, and he was about to become famous. Eagle 7 moved toward the intersection with the Cathedral Square. But Bartelborth, in his Panther, sensed the approach of another American vehicle and slewed his turret to the right, aiming directly at the corner where any American tank would have to appear. As Eagle 7 edged around the corner, Davis in the hull saw the Panther's long barrel pointed straight at them through his periscope. Smoyer in the turret had not yet traversed the main gun far enough to aim at the Panther. For a frozen moment, the German tank had the drop on them. Then came the moment that decided everything. Bartelborth did not fire. He had never seen a Pershing tank before. Its low-profile, rounded turret and unfamiliar silhouette looked nothing like the boxy Shermans he had been fighting for months. In that critical instant, Bartelborth mistook the Pershing for a German vehicle and ordered his gunner to hold fire. His daughter later told German documentary filmmakers that her father had said the tank that appeared in that situation would have been a German tank. He expected a Sherman, and this tank was not a Sherman. So he was very surprised and hesitated. That hesitation killed him. Driver McVeigh did not stop at the corner as doctrine suggested. He drove directly into the middle of the intersection, roughly 110 meters from the Panther, so they would not be a sitting target if they had to maneuver. Smoyer fired on the move as soon as he had center mass in his gun sight. The first 90mm round struck the Panther's hull below the gun shield. De Riggy rammed a second round home in seconds. Smoyer fired again, hitting the turret ring area. A third round followed immediately. All 3 shells penetrated the Panther's armor. The 2 side hits went completely through the tank and out the other side. The Panther burst into flames. Technical Sergeant Bates's camera captured the entire sequence in approximately 46 seconds of film that became one of the most iconic pieces of combat footage from the Second World War. The film shows the 3 hits striking the Panther. It shows crew members scrambling desperately from hatches as fire erupts inside the tank. One crewman, likely the gunner, is visible clawing out of the commander's hatch as the second round hits, then slipping back into the burning turret when flames overwhelm him. He was killed. Bartelborth and 3 other crew members escaped the burning tank, one of them on fire. The footage panned up to show Cologne Cathedral's twin spires rising above the smoke from the burning Panther, creating an image that would be reproduced in countless documentaries and history books. Smoyer later recalled the engagement by saying that their driver drove into the middle of the intersection so they would not be a sitting target. As they were moving, he fired once and saw the strike. Then they stopped momentarily, and he fired 2 more shells to make absolutely sure the enemy would not be able to fire at their side. All 3 shells penetrated. Decades later, on September 18, 2019, all 5 members of Eagle Seven's crew received the Bronze Star at the National World War II Memorial in Washington. Clarence Smoyer, then 95 years old, received his medal in person during an emotional ceremony. Robert Early, John de Riggy, Homer Davis, and William McVeigh were honored posthumously with their families accepting their medals. One experimental vehicle pushed the 90mm concept even further than the standard Pershing. The T-26 E1-1, commonly called the Super Pershing, mounted the experimental T-15 E1 long 90mm gun with a barrel over 21 feet long, designed specifically to match or surpass the Tiger II's fearsome 88mm L-71 gun in penetration performance. The Super Pershing's crew in the 3rd Armored Division consisted of Commander Staff Sergeant Joseph Maduri and 18-year-old gunner Corporal John P. Irwin, who would later write a memoir of his experiences titled Another River, Another Town. Maintenance crews field modified the Super Pershing extensively before it entered combat, welding an 80mm armor plate cut from a knocked-out Panther onto the gun mantlet, and adding 2 38mm armor plates with an air gap on the hull front for additional protection. This improvised additional armor was directed by Lieutenant Belton Cooper, who would later write his own famous account of armored warfare titled Death Traps. The crew did not receive the T-26E4 until April 10, 1945, at Epschenrode in central Germany. Its first combat action occurred on April 4 between the Weser River and Nordheim, where the long 90mm destroyed what was likely a Panther or Tiger at approximately 1,400 to 1,500 yards, with a single shot. The Super Pershing's most controversial engagement occurred at Dessau on April 21, 1945, just weeks before the German surrender. Corporal Irwin fired 2 shots into a German tank at close range in an urban engagement, and the crew claimed to have destroyed a Tiger II. However, historians, including the respected armor expert Stephen Zaloga, have noted that the nearest known Tiger II unit was approximately 70 miles from Dessau on that date, making the target more likely a Panzer IV or possibly a disguised vehicle. The Super Pershing was the only one of its kind to see combat in Europe. 25 planned production T-26E4s were manufactured, but never reached the front before VE Day. The 90mm gun's overall impact on the war must be understood in proper proportion. It arrived late, in limited numbers, and as the Zebra Technical Mission's own after-action report honestly acknowledged, German armor had been so crippled by attrition, fuel shortages, and declining production quality as to present a very poor opponent by the time Pershings reached the front in significant numbers. The M36 Jackson tank destroyer had the greater cumulative impact on actual combat operations, equipping approximately 27 tank destroyer battalions by war's end, and providing the backbone of American anti-armor capability from October 1944 through May 1945. During the Ardennes campaign alone, American tank destroyer forces of all types knocked out approximately 306 German tanks and assault guns. The German response to the 90mm was effectively non-existent, not because they dismissed the weapon's capabilities, but because the war ended too quickly for any doctrinal adaptation. No German tactical manual updates specifically addressing the 90mm have been found in surviving Wehrmacht records. No formal intelligence reassessments were issued to frontline units. The German military bureaucratic apparatus was collapsing in the final months of the war. The 90mm's battlefield appearance coincided exactly with Germany's terminal decline, making it impossible for historians to separate the gun's tactical effect from the broader strategic collapse of the Third Reich. What the 90mm gun decisively changed was American morale and tactical confidence. Tank crews, who had spent months knowing they were outgunned, who had watched friends burn in Shermans that could not fight back, suddenly had a weapon that could stand toe-to-toe with anything the Germans fielded. Infantry units felt equally encouraged. Troops who could not maneuver away from advancing panzers took enormous psychological comfort in knowing American armor could now stand and fight on equal terms. The larger lesson of the 90mm story is institutional. The 90mm gun was technically ready well before it reached the battlefield. The Ordnance Department proposed mounting it in armored vehicles in 1942 and formally requested mass production of 90mm armed tanks and tank destroyers in September 1943. McNair's doctrinal rigidity, his insistence that tanks should not fight other tanks and that no battle need existed for heavier armament, delayed deployment by critical months that cost American lives in Normandy, in the Ardennes, and in countless forgotten engagements across France, Belgium, and Germany. Marshall's intervention in December 1943, McNair's death in July 1944, Eisenhower's fury after witnessing the Normandy tank battles, and the shock of the Bulge each chipped away at the institutional resistance. The 90mm's story is ultimately one of a weapon that was right, championed by men like Barnes and Devers, who understood what was coming, held back by a doctrine that proved catastrophically wrong, and that arrived just barely in time to matter in the final campaigns of the war. There is one final chapter to this story, and it happened not on a battlefield, but in a living room in Germany nearly 70 years after the war ended. In 2013, Clarence Smoyer travelled to Germany to meet Gustav Schaefer, a former German tank gunner who had been fighting in Cologne on the same day as the Cathedral duel. Schaefer had been a gunner in a Panzer IV, not the Panther that Smoyer destroyed, but he was present during a separate tragic incident that day involving the death of a German civilian woman named Katharina Esser. That incident had haunted Smoyer for decades, even though he had not fired the shot that killed her, because he witnessed her death and carried the weight of it through his long life. The two old soldiers, former enemies who had tried to kill each other's countrymen 8 decades earlier, sat together as very old men in Schaefer's home. Through an interpreter, Schaefer told Smoyer that in the next life they would be comrades instead of enemies. It was a moment of reconciliation that neither man had ever expected to experience. Gustav Schaefer died in 2017. Clarence Smoyer sent flowers to his funeral with a handwritten note that read simply, "I will never forget you, your brother in arms, Clarence." Smoyer himself passed away in 2024 at the age of 99. He was the last surviving member of Eagle Seven's crew. The 90mm gun that surprised German tank crews in the final months of the Second World War did more than change the balance of firepower on the Western Front. It taught a generation of military planners that doctrine must never outpace technology, and that the men fighting the war deserve the best weapons their nation can provide, not the weapons that fit a comfortable theory developed far from the battlefield. That lesson was written in blood and fire in the burning hulls of Shermans across France and Belgium, in the deaths of tankers like Karl Kellner who never had a chance against enemies their guns could not hurt. And it was finally answered in the shadow of Cologne Cathedral, when 3 rounds from a weapon the Germans never expected ended a duel before it could properly begin. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below telling us what other World War II weapons or battles you would like to learn about. Your support helps us create more content like this. Thank you for watching.